All right. Looks like most of us are here, are getting there. I've written that. Don't go past that section. If you haven't, we'll talk about this other stuff as class goes on. But I'll go a little slower just because I think it's one of the best. Having a smaller classroom right now is that, hey, Lincoln, what if you switched one seat to the left and then we're my cameraman, making sure things were all right? I like it. I give the iPad your seat. Thanks. That'd be awesome. Look at that. Can you still see okay, Lincoln?
Yeah, I can see good. How do you want this? Do you want
mostly on me. I'll take a picture of the notes and post them.
Okay, I'll keep it on you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. And then you can sit there. Perfect.
Yeah.
You don't have to like follow me around with it. I might be walking back and forth.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
The Odyssey. What happened? What do you remember from the reading this past weekend? I know it was a day or two ago. I saw some people reviewing the Odyssey on their own yesterday, and that kind of made my heart happy. But what do you remember about what you read? What happened? We're only really going to cover the first sort of two scenes today, and then tomorrow we'll finish talking about book one, and then we'll start moving a lot faster. But book one is incredibly important for setting up all of the conflict and tension in the work as a whole. Lincoln, tell me something that happened.
Well, I mean, like, it kind of briefly goes over, like, the council. It goes over the council of the gods, where they all kind of call together and they're talking like about Odysseus and about how to kind of like bring him home since Poseidon is away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're talking about how they're going to send Hermes.
They're going to send Hermes to get him. What else?
Athena goes and visits Odysseus' son, Telemachus, who's dealing with the suitors who are like trying to get to marry Penelope.
Yeah, you can call him Telemachus or Telemachus. I go say Telemachus, but that's sort of up in the air. Yeah, she goes and what was the last part you said about Telemachus?
He's dealing with the suitors and want to marry Penelope.
Dealing with the suitors. Tell me more about these guys. Who are the suitors? Not just well-dressed. Coral.
Okay, so basically they like took over because of their since Odysseus was gone, they took over like his house and like they're abusing the hospitality, and they just kind of live there and like they're refusing to leave until they get to like marry Odysseus's wife.
Yeah, absolutely. They're staying there until one of them gets to marry her. What else in this book? Lots of little things. Any details that you remember?
Penelope comes in and she like criticizes the singing, like the song we were singing, because it's like really sad.
Oh yeah, what's that song about? Do you remember?
Like, I don't know, I just remember it's like really sad and talking about how like he's not coming back, and then she's like, you should just play like a pretty tune, and then Telemachus is like, I like the tune, or like, it's a good thing to play. Oh, and then Telemachus, like, doesn't he tell the suitors that he's lost hope in the Odysseus return, and like he doesn't believe anything the people say anymore? Yeah,
he does say that at least to Mentees and to the suitors that he's not really sure what happened to his dad. Just one more. You guys remember exactly what the content was of that song? Yeah.
It was like the homecoming of the soldiers of the Trojan War.
Yeah, it's about things that just happened, right? That hey, all these soldiers just came back from war. Well, not to Ithaca, and Penelope's like, don't remind me that Odysseus isn't here, right? And then Telemachus apparently, has some new spirit that he didn't have before, and even rebukes her for rebuking it. You guys actually remember, how does Mentees and Telemachus think of the singer, the bard? Do you guys remember? There's a couple of comments made. How does Athena and Telemachus think of the bard positively or negatively? Reagan?
Positively?
What are you looking at?
What?
Like which line?
I haven't found it yet, but I was just guessing.
Just guessing? Okay.
I thought it was positively.
Okay.
Just kidding.
Huh?
No, never mind.
Oh, good. Okay. I'll just say here that it's sort of interesting that Odysseus and Mentees think of the fact that the men love to go to listen to songs as a negative thing. And my question just for y'all is, isn't that Homer's job? Isn't that his whole job, to tell stories and to sing them aloud? That's his whole shtick. And in this line, there's a character actually doing what Homer does, and whatever. We'll get back to that later. Olivia.
One thing I thought was interesting is like last the Iliad, it only had like the one lyre, like the one singing, and the loom. And I feel like, didn't Telemachus already tell Penelope to go back to her loom? And then like the singing.
Loom is for weaving something, and then singing. Oh yeah, or you're noticing that the loom and the lyre are both arts. Keep going. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh, well, that was all.
Oh, that was it? Okay, yeah, those are both arts, and he's telling her to go back to one, and they maybe are critiquing another. But you're right in noticing that if you're weaving a tapestry, that is creating an image of something. Just like whenever you write a story, you're also making a kind of image of something. We'll see a lot more of that happening in the Odyssey. There's only one scene in the Iliad where that happened. You guys remember the one person singing in the Odyssey, besides the goddess herself? Yeah.
Achilles?
Yeah, Achilles, we see him in book 9. He's singing of the great deeds of many men. He's acting like a bard, just like this guy is doing in book 1. Okay, enough of that. That stuff is fine. Let's talk about what happened. Or let's start to outline some of these things. We need to know these words like the back of our hand. Just as, so we're going to start off with here. Who and where is Odysseus? We're going to write these things down. We need to think of the word Manus as synonymous with the Iliad. Just absolutely synonymous with the Iliad. Divine wrath. And in contrast to that, does it need to be scooted one more?
Yeah, just a tiny bit more.
In contrast to that, the Odyssey begins with, its first word is andra in Greek, which means man. And this highlights the beginning of the beginning of a explanation of a difference between the Iliad and the Odyssey and its content. One thing that really highlights this actually in the Iliad is book 23, the funeral games of Patroclus. Does Achilles participate in those games? No, he does not. And remember, it's almost like he's still kind of closer to a god than a human being is, than any of the men he's fighting with are. Even the guy who is the son of Hercules, he dies early on actually in the Iliad. While Hercules is clearly the son of a god, Achilles seems to be one of the last few demigods, these half-god, half-human being people. And the Odyssey has very few half-god, half-human being people. Actually, I can't even think of any off the top of my head. We have almost completely moved into the realm of human beings as a whole, solely talking about human beings. And in this way, this word even sort of talks about what does it mean to be a human being universally. Does Odysseus offer us a better vision of that than Achilles? Can we actually imitate Odysseus, where some things of Achilles would be difficult to imitate? Can we actually, I don't know, have a god set our hair on fire and wield this massive shield? Whatever. Okay. And this word polytropos, which means many ways or turns. What did we say from our notes last week that this meant? What sort of the contextual meaning of polytropos? Reagan?
It means many ways or terms.
Yes, but what does that mean for Odysseus?
Like it has like he has many persons or like faces or like different like personalities or go into many different places. Yeah. Literally turns many ways. And it's kind of a subtle sea comparison here. Like if you're just ever floating at sea, you're probably just going to bob up and down, and you might be facing different directions. At one point, he's almost home, then he goes somewhere else. He's one person to in one place, and he's kind of a different person somewhere else. This word is packed with meaning and sort of explains the story of the Odyssey as a whole. It also says that he is the sacker of Troy. He is given credit for sacking Troy. He is the sacker of Troy. We know that he we're told in these first 20 lines that he has 2 desires. And you write this whole thing. He wants to have his nostos for himself and his crew, and he wants to see his wife Penelope.
And put your pencil down for a minute once you have written that. Okay. By setting up the two desires of Odysseus, once more, in these first 20 lines, Homer is telling us what the whole conflict of the Odyssey is about. Is he going to get to his wife, and is he going to get to have his homecoming? And by setting up these two categories, whenever we see what is on the mind of Zeus, these two things start to make sense. In fact, we sort of see that Odysseus actually is a failure at achieving homecoming for his crew. So if he failed this for his crew, is he going to fail Nostos for himself as well? Now we're going to see that these other men coming up from the Trojan War, many of them also did not get to make it home. And Odysseus also maybe says he longs for his wife. But like Agamemnon, Odysseus is going to be with many women over the course of the Odyssey. And when it says he's with Calypso on Ogygia, they're not doing nothing. He definitely is in love with Calypso in a certain way, although he is longing for his wife. So Homer has sort of subtly set up a threat to his homecoming and to his wife. The fact that his crew is dead and that Odysseus is with Calypso on Ogygia. We need to keep in mind that she is a threat to Penelope because she wants Odysseus to be her husband, just as the suitors want Penelope to be one of their wives. One of a wife to one of them. And she's offering Odysseus immortality. With this, we sort of see, you can write this down in a second, but just want y'all to sit for a minute. One of these questions that's kind of arises throughout the Odyssey is, where does Odysseus belong? And we sort of know from the beginning that he's supposed to be with his wife on Ithaca. But just as this book has patterns that repeat over the course of the story, where Odysseus will go to a new island, and there's some woman there, and he will potentially be able to marry that woman, or there's a romantic connection on that island or with that woman. And it seems like Odysseus potentially could rule that island. And this pattern repeats. It repeats on Ogygia, it repeats on Phaeacia, and it repeats on Circe's island herself, on Circe's island. Those are the three sort of notable moments here. So this question, where does Odysseus belong? There's a tension. Is Odysseus going to go have a new wife in a new home, or is he going to do what he's sort of go to where his place is supposed to be, back with his wife Penelope, and on Ithaca? Also, keep in mind here is how is Odysseus being characterized. We know that he's being called, like he fails to get his crew members home, but we learn that it's not the crew members' fault. It says that they've committed some kind of sacrilege against the gods by eating the cattle of Helios. We'll see more about that later. But we're supposed to expect Odysseus to, when we see him, to be ready to go home, longing to go back to the land of his family. Yeah.
Is Helios like Apollo? Or
No, they're two different gods of the sun.
Oh, okay.
And it just kind of depends on whenever a Greek author wants one to be in charge and not. So,
Okay.
yeah. And then lastly here, Homer says that the gods arranged Odysseus' homecoming. This is a troublesome sort of thing to say, especially thinking about Zeus's opening lines of the Odyssey, that all men cause problems for themselves, and it's not even the gods' fault for doing so. If Homer is saying this, it means that in some sense the gods have directly caused the problems Odysseus is suffering with. But if Zeus is right, it maybe means that the human beings have sort of caused their own problems in the Odyssey. So this sort of statement is, we know Homer is saying this too. He's the author of this statement. So is he accusing the gods of this? Is the characterization of the gods the same for Homer? Such that they're sort of bumbling fools. But even then, like, maybe Homer's got the wrong idea himself. Any thoughts or questions at this point? We've really only talked about the first 20 lines of the Odyssey. Okay. If you don't know what this word means, just write it down somewhere. It's not officially part of our notes, but the word sacrilege is important for us for our understanding of what's happening. And Josh, I'm going to have you be cameraman number 2. And stuff right there. People who are going to be watching this later, there's a photo posted of this online under the notes section. So, just a bad angle. What's up?
No, it's good.
Just kind of funny. All right. Council of the Gods. We see, first of all, that Zeus is contemplating Agamemnon. And this one line, and this actually the story of what happens to, hey Grace, what happens to him is kind of interesting. In fact, Agamemnon seems to be a direct literary parallel. If you guys, there's a seat by Lincoln, and then, yeah, just fill up. I'm gonna keep talking. I'm actually gonna post the video of the lecture on later, if you want to listen to that. Or you'll need to listen to that later. But we'll see that there's actually, I'm gonna even just draw these three, I'm gonna draw these 3 tables here. Agamemnon is a foil to Odysseus. They're both men. Neither of them are demigods. Clytemnestra is a foil to Penelope, or the opposite of Penelope, or a character that's very similar to Penelope. And Orestes is sort of like Telemachus. I'll put a star by the table whenever you should start writing them. But you guys can write these 2 things. But let's just think about these tables together. We know that both Agamemnon and Odysseus are kings. That's the first sort of thing that we need to connect. Remember the city? What's the city that Agamemnon's the king of? Griffin?
Mycenae.
Ooh, no.
Oh.
Yeah?
Is it Argos?
Yeah, Argos. And we know Odysseus is king of Ithaca. We know that, one more just to keep in mind, I'm not going to say that Odysseus and Agamemnon cheat on their spouse. Like I've mentioned before, in Greek culture, a man was free to have liaisons with other women, but the woman was not allowed to do so. So it's intentional to say, whenever I say Clytemnestra cheats on her husband, because culturally she did break a social contract, and Odysseus and Agamemnon have not. But they have in common this sort of relationships with other women. With Agamemnon, the only one we know for sure is Cassandra. Well, actually, that's not even true. Cassandra, and he wanted Chryseis, later then he wanted Briseis. He has a history of having relationships with other women, but we're not even really supposed to see that as the main problem with Agamemnon. And Odysseus is going to be with many women, even in the Odyssey, 3 notable ones besides his wife. Let me write those 3 lines down. These men both want Nostos, a homecoming of some kind. And we know for sure that we'll see a little bit more of. I didn't mention this when we were talking about the stories in between the Iliad and the Odyssey. But we know that Agamemnon commits a kind of sacrilege against Zeus. He forgets to sacrifice to him and has to suffer because of that. And Odysseus, we know, doesn't commit sacrilege actually at Troy. But there is a god who is ticked off at Odysseus. Which god is that? Mm-hmm.
Poseidon.
And why?
Because he took out his son, the Cyclops.
So yeah, it's almost like Poseidon sees the stabbing out of Polyphemus's eye as a kind of sacrilege. And there's a lot more going on there, but whether or not that's actually sacrilege isn't really up to us, because Poseidon thinks that what's happening there is actual sacrilege. So we have more to see about this, but we know that this interaction with Polyphemus seems to be the cause of Odysseus' problems, because he has made a god frustrated and upset by his actions there. The last thing here to keep in mind, especially, I think about, well, remember when Agamemnon is giving all those different speeches in Book 4 of the Iliad? What kinds of kinds of advice is he giving? Or do you guys at least remember that scene where he's going up to one soldier and saying one thing, goes up to another soldier and says another thing? You guys remember that? Maybe a little bit? Okay, the last guy he talks to is Diomedes. This is Book 4. And he says, Diomedes, you're the worst soldier ever. And then what does Book 5 open with Diomedes? Yeah.
Athena lights his head on fire and he's going on his killing everyone.
Yeah, Diomedes is awesome and the gods think so. So Agamemnon seems to be a fool, even in the Iliad. And I think even when we see him in the play of his own name, where he dies, it's not like parading the conquest of Cassandra around his wife probably isn't the smartest thing for him to do. Probably not the best thing. So Agamemnon seems to be universally portrayed as somewhat foolish, but Odysseus, we know, is called over and over again wise. That he is wise. Even the polytropos seems to indicate that he can turn things over in his head. He's a deep thinker. But if he shares this much in common with Agamemnon, what are we supposed to make of that? So, just as Homer seems to be saying Odysseus is a swell guy, also sort of subtly, by comparing him to Agamemnon, by Zeus comparing him to Agamemnon, we're supposed to see that these two characters are actually more linked than not. And the fact that Zeus is worried that the same thing that happened to Agamemnon might happen to Odysseus maybe means that these two men are more similar than different. And we also know, though, that Zeus is a pretty horrible judge of character and seems to be pretty out of it most of the time, or easily swayed most of the time. So maybe Zeus just doesn't have a good grip on things himself, and expecting Odysseus to. So maybe Homer's right, maybe Zeus is. But we just need to keep in mind here that Zeus is worried that we're about to have Agamemnon, the sequel, whenever we see with Odysseus here. Okay. Clytemnestra and Penelope. They're both queens. We know Clytemnestra cheats on her husband, and that's a question for Penelope. Is she also going to cheat on her husband? And cheat in the sense that she marries another man and Odysseus is still alive. We also know that Clytemnestra is killed by her son. And we need to keep in mind that that's this sort of question too, is Penelope going to be killed by Telemachus if she cheats on her husband? So one more just one more parallel to the story of Agamemnon. And lastly, Orestes himself versus Telemachus. They're both princes. They both have absent fathers. Orestes is raised away from home. We know Telemachus is raised by his mom. We know Orestes is mature and Telemachus is immature. We know Orestes kills his mother and Telemachus might have to, depending on what Penelope's actions are. So these two little families are, compared to each other. Mm-hmm.
It's actually kind of interesting because Telemachus, whose father is extremely wise, grows up around other youths and doesn't really have a father figure, and he is raised, and not only just because he's young, but he's just immature because he never had a father figure to guide him in the right ways. And then Orestes, who has a seemingly foolish dad who's kind of dumb, is more mature and more smart.
Yeah.
than Telemachus.
Have you you guys know what Peter Pan's group gang is called? You guys remember that? Anyone know that? Caitlin?
The Lost Boys?
The Lost Boys. Okay, so that's sort of a little, that whole story is incredibly moral, but kind of this idea that if a group of boys are always around each other and there's never a kind of actual leader or like man or I don't know, even young man sort of leading that group of boys, they will remain lost, too addicted to sort of childish ways and things, and can't properly grow up. Peter Pan's really not positive. It doesn't really give you a positive outlook towards eternal boy, like this idea that eternal boyhood would be a good thing, or that childhood is actually a state that should last for a very long time. But it's a similar sort of thing here, where the suitors actually are, some of them are foreigners, some of them are actually sons of men who went off to Troy. They are actually related to companions of Odysseus who are now dead. And now they've all sort of grown up together. It even says that Telemachus is with the suitors when we first meet him. He's different, but these are guys his age. A lot of these guys are his own age. Isn't that weird? Yeah. And so he clearly seems to think they aren't as moral as him. So whenever we talk, especially whenever Mentes shows up. But Telemachus, Telemachus is very similar to them too. Is he going to be like one of them? Okay, obviously not marrying his mom, but is he going to be someone who's just immature, just fatherless as well? It's all sort of subtly being set up there. So you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot to pack in to 2 lines of the Odyssey, but that's absolutely what is being triggered here. This comparison is supposed to arise. We're going to see this comparison happen like 7 more times in the first 4 books. We won't take notes on it every time, but it'll be your job to recognize how Homer is comparing Agamemnon and Odysseus. Yeah?
So if Homer thinks they're similar, then and he doesn't like Agamemnon, then why does he like Odysseus? Like, is it just because Odysseus is wise and Agamemnon's not?
Yeah. I think we should keep reading and see. I think you should keep asking why. Maybe Homer doesn't dislike Agamemnon. We actually don't have comments on what exactly Homer thought about Agamemnon's homecoming. We'll get stories of his homecoming so we can see what other people thought about his homecoming. But yeah, I think that's a great question. Why does Homer lift up Odysseus and not Agamemnon if they're sort of similar? Okay, last thing. Not last thing. Last board. And we'll scoot this guy over to, Skylar's side here. Well, okay. The last thing here, or last board, is this sort of claim that Zeus makes that humans cause trouble for themselves and the gods aren't to blame. The fact this is the opening dialogue, actual speech of the Iliad, of the Odyssey, is very strange. Compare this to what Achilles says about Zeus at the end of the Iliad. He says that Zeus has 2 urns, and he deals out either a mixture of good and bad to human beings, or just bad to them. And so the Iliad very much ends with the kind of view of the gods as the gods are at fault for everything that the gods are at fault for everything. But this one opens with, here, Kristen, you'll just fill in somewhere. Yeah, that'd be great. Heck, okay, this might just be the new chart. I think Holman probably wants to move though.
We sit together in geometry.
Well, it's because then we both go.
Okay. But looking at this here, this is a direct contrast. It's almost like if you actually had the Odyssey and the Iliad bound together, even though we know they're separated by a number of stories. It's almost like, it's a direct contrast. One ends where the humans are accusing the gods, and now this one opens with the gods accusing the humans. The god, Zeus, accusing the humans of causing trouble for themselves. And it's almost like, just as this first word of both books reflects that contrast between these 2 epics, Manus, divine wrath, seems to be saying that the gods. It implies that the gods are the ones who cause suffering. Just as this one begins with Andra, humans cause suffering. These opening words are packed with subtlety and even reveal something about the nature of the work as a whole. And these questions don't go away. Are the gods causing suffering? And this one is humans causing suffering. But where the Iliad ends, affirming that the gods cause suffering, the Odyssey opens with saying it's the humans' fault. And Zeus has an example. He says Aegisthus was told by Hermes, don't go seduce Clytemnestra. And he does so anyway. But the question is, have you guys ever not been aware of something that you could do, and then someone says don't do something, and you're like, I kind of want to do that thing? Okay, pretty universal, right? That happens to everybody. Did the gods cause this by suggesting to not do it to Hermes? So even here, Zeus's claim is kind of iffy about why humans are really to blame for their suffering. Yeah.
Is this like reason why there might be like 2 different Homers? Because like the Iliad and Odyssey have very different points of view.
Yeah. So in general, I think that trying to see Homer as 2 different people is a bit of a cop-out. And I'm not saying you're copping out, but I'm saying that's why you're absolutely right. This is what people say, this is just 2 different Homers. This is just 2 different guys trying to say 2 different things, and or different groups of people saying a different story at a different time at a later date, because it seems so different than what happened in the past. And I think there's something to that. I think that if you still see it as the same Homer, his actual view probably remains even hidden from us. And he might be saying that these are these 2 options for us. Maybe there's another option. But I mean, even if you say humans cause suffering, gods cause suffering, are those the only 2 options? And I don't know. Are those the only 2 options? Is there anything else? Do y'all have anything? What else could? Yeah.
I mean, it could be like a mix. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, it's not always gods or not always humans. It could be like sometimes the gods, because these gods aren't perfect, obviously. And then it could be sometimes the humans, because we're not like perfect either.
I mean, yeah, Olivia?
Yeah, I would say like if you have a parent, it's like the gods would be the parent, and the child would be learning from their parents, and it would be the conflict between the child would say, no, but you led me astray, or like you were the one parenting me, you should have done a better job.
Mm-hmm.
And then the parent would say, no, but I told you right from wrong, and you're the one that disobeyed, you should have done a better job. And so it's kind of like the difference between like who's at fault more, the parent or the child?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, yeah, they both seem to have deficiencies of some kind, right? I think that might be helpful. Or there's this other option that maybe Homer's saying no one knows. That the gods don't know and humans don't know. Or if they both seem to be pointing fingers at each other, what if no one really knows the cause here? So it's a mixture could be another option. No one knows could be another option. But I think, and we need a question, is this the thesis of the Odyssey, that human beings cause their own suffering? And in this case, does a particular human being cause his own suffering? Does Odysseus himself cause his own suffering in the Odyssey? Is it the gods who are at fault for his suffering? Like Homer has even suggested already, that the gods have arranged his homecoming. Which means that in the past 10 years, he hasn't been able to come home. So Homer's already arguing in this text. The first 100 lines, he's already arguing with the gods, he's arguing with the claims of his own characters. Remember here too that it says that Hermes is sent to get Odysseus from Ogygia. And if you guys actually just look really quick, Brinley pointed this out, I thought it was really cool. I think it's on the page 29. Page 29.
Right.
Gives. Where is it? Everyone else turn to page 29. It says, I'm going to borrow yours real quick. Look at line 84. Athena says, "Let us dispatch Hermes, the guide, the slayer of Argos, to the island of Ogygia." It's almost like the story of Agamemnon is restarting once more. Hermes was the one who was sent to Aegisthus, right, to tell him what not to do. Now Hermes is going to Ogygia to tell Odysseus something. And it says Athena says that Hermes is the slayer of Argos. That's kind of implying, or that's pretty clearly implying, that Hermes' actions caused the death of Agamemnon. Athena's saying this about it. That little line is not just saying nothing. And that's sort of where these little epithets in the Odyssey, to me at least, are actually suggesting way more clearly in the Odyssey more than the Iliad. Where in the Iliad it almost seems kind of like whenever you see swift-footed Achilles doing something, it's harder to kind of say like why they call them swift-footed Achilles, why they did that. In this case, it seems like whenever they say that Hermes is the slayer of Argos, that epithet is actually suggesting something very serious about the gods. And it's Athena saying that too. So maybe Athena is disagreeing with her father sort of subtly about who's actually at fault for the death of Aegisthus. Okay, so yeah, the thing here is that is Homer messing with us, offering a different origin for human suffering? What's going on here? Reagan's absolutely, that question is just asking, is this a different Homer? We're going to treat it like it's not a different Homer, but maybe as you guys read the Odyssey, you'll think like, I just think this is too different. This Homer is offering us a vision that is, very different than the one before. Last but not least here is this little thing, is that Athena is sent to Ithaca and Hermes to Ogygia. We actually get to write this note down, so there's a few more minutes. We get to compare these actions. So Athena goes to Ithaca, which is kind of strange. Athena is the patron of Odysseus, but we know that she goes to Ithaca to make a man out of Telemachus. That she is going to go posture as a man to try to help Telemachus become a man himself. So she's acting in the way that Odysseus should have been acting towards his son if he were there. Although some of this is problematic. She is a woman goddess, although she has very masculine tendencies. And she's a goddess of wisdom, but she also disguises herself, and sort of a disguise is essentially a lie of a kind. That's kind of strange. We know Hermes goes to Ogygia. Hermes is a messenger god, but we also know that, or I think I've mentioned as well, that at this point, Hermes is also being considered as a god of the dead. He is a death god at this point, as well as a messenger god. Not lord of the dead, but even traditionally would transfer souls from Hades, from Earth to the realm of Hades, and then they would be ferried across the seashore. So even here we see that Athena, right, she is attending to the living, or attends to the living Telemachus. And we see that Hermes is, as a death god, goes to the Calypso Odysseus. And then also too, the most common epithet is actually, you guys actually remember what the most common epithet is for Ithaca? Do you remember the school poem? You actually should remember. How is Ithaca described in the opening lines of Ulysses?
She like started.
Ulysses, bountiful little prophesy now, king, by the still hearth, among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife. What does barren crags mean? Yeah.
Well, like it's broken down and kind of like destroyed.
Well, it means that the terrain is actually rocky. Rocky Ithaca. And that means that it's maybe not even like a great, beautiful land, but we know that this island of Calypso, Ogygia, is a paradise. It's almost like Odysseus has died because he's hidden and he's being visited by this death god. But he's also in this paradise, which is kind of opposed to that. He's being offered immortality, and but he's leaving paradise, apparently to go back to a land that physically is not as beautiful as Ogygia. Third question, sorry, Reagan, Joe.
No, answer.
Okay. If you were testing, I'll have this video posted of the lecture online, and I'll have the board posted if you're still taking notes. And if you were in class today, you should make sure that you review lines. Yeah, so review, whatever that means to you. I'm not going to tell you how to review, but be ready to talk about these things tomorrow after class. Hopefully tomorrow during class, about 25 minutes in, we'll start to read book 2, and we'll start to get on that really fast schedule. That fast schedule that I talked about. Yeah, Olivia.
Are we going to do the reading journal?
This week is kind of weird and ridiculous, so that normal schedule that I want to have might start next week. But we'll see. Yeah. Well, it probably won't be a reading journal or a test or a seminar this week. Yeah. All right, thanks guys. Y'all can go.